Hi, everybody. It's day 5, right? Isn't this the 5th day? It's Friday.
Fifth day, Friday. We made it to a week that has lasted 3 months long.
Doesn't it feel like it?
TGIF.
Yeah.
So we are here today with my friend and colleague, Julia Torres. I am so excited that you agreed to join us. Julia is a Book Love Foundation board member, just came on to support our grant winners, which is kind of as a board, we decided that one of the things we needed to do as a foundation was do more work to support the grant winners. And so Julia is the perfect person for that. She's also going to be co-hosting the podcast this spring and then taking them over, which is exciting for me because I know you are born to podcast. And then she's also NCTE's secondary section at large rep. And through that work, you've been doing some amazing things at NCTE. Just so proud of all the ways you are lifting up shifts in practice for teachers.
Thank you so much.
As well as one of the founding members of Disrupt Text, the group that has, I think, revolutionized for a lot of people what's possible in teaching English. So you have been a busy girl, busy woman.
Thank you. I have been. I've been, just trying to, what gives me joy is to make the classroom experience better for our students, particularly our most vulnerable students. And then I also just love serving teachers, as you do too. So I'm really happy to be here with both of you because I think that we're all committed to just making professional development a more joyful experience for educators. And that's something that as educators, as people who, have been on the receiving end of professional development, we're committed to making sure that it's as enjoyable and authentic and meaningful as possible. So I'm so happy to be here with both of you today. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me. We had a snowpocalypse happen yesterday here in Denver. A massive snowstorm came through. So I have been in the house with my 2 children and my animals and my books.
Well, it actually hailed here in Southern California yesterday. So that may have been the precursor to what you experienced in Denver.
It probably was. That's crazy. Is that normal?
No, it's very, very, very unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah, just kind of reinforced sort of the gloomiest, week, that a lot of teachers have had.
Yes.
Which kind of reminds me, we've kind of started a lot with sharing what we're reading. And since we have you here, we're going to ask you in a moment. As I said a day or two ago, I was reading this book, Leonard and Hungry Paul, and I'm just going to read one line from it. It's so interesting that this came across. This character in the book is having trouble kind of interacting with the world. It's too much for him. And he says here that the trick is to know how much of the world to let in without becoming overwhelmed. And I think that is the trick for us as educators and as humans, as parents. We have friends who have elementary school kids and they're now shuttered at home with them. And their school has dumped hours and hours and hours of work for the kids to do at home. And the parents, on top of all the other stresses that they have, are now expected to, teach a full day of school, which I think is really kind of crazy and unrealistic. But this idea of how much of this, you can kind of go down the rabbit hole, right, of listening to this. In my notebook this morning, California is now the first state in the country that has shuttered all of its residents. Mm-hmm. We are homebound, 40 million people homebound. And so I think this is going to be a national trend soon. And I think as teachers, when we think about what we ask for our kids to do at home, we need to be sensitive to the reality of the situation. This is not business as normal. And we should be thinking about the kinds of, reading and writing experiences that will be valuable for our kids.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because my daughter's here with us and she teaches 5th grade down in Boston, her first year. And she started Flipgrid for her students to share some book talks and, try to get them connected, getting very little response. And then she posted, drop a joke in Flipgrid, and all of a sudden there's a flurry of kids. They're there. They were watching. Just like on our Flipgrid, we have, like 40 people who respond a day, but there have been 6,500 views. So people that just kind of want to watch, but what cracked me up was their jokes, right? Like, how do you get your Kleenex to dance? Put a little boogie in it. They're 10 years old.
That's cute.
And they're so cute telling their jokes. But I was struck also by how much chatter I see about people being asked to do things online with kids that are rigorous, and I think it's the opposite of what I think we almost need right now. Two people commented in ways that I liked on our Flipgrid. One was, in this time of mourning, look for beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I hadn't really named it as mourning, but right now I am mourning a loss of connection, even with people here in town that I'm not seeing all the time. And the other was a quote from Angela Thomas, Angie Thomas, Hate You Give. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes greatness. I was like, score, that's the Notebook, right? So my book talk today also is connected to what I wrote in my notebook this morning. Yesterday, Sarah on Flipgrid, she's from Portland, Oregon, mentioned Kim Stafford. Now, if you remember, William Stafford, poet laureate, he wrote Traveling Through the Dark, won the National Book Award in '62. Now, the best English assignment I ever got, freshman year in high school, was to collect 100 poems that mattered to me. And I spent forever. I burned the edges of the titles I had written in calligraphy and glued them into this book, which is somewhere in my house. But I chose Traveling Through the Dark, which is a poem about the Wilson River in Oregon, where I fished with my dad all the time. And he comes upon a deer that has been hit by a car in the road. A poem that I've used in every class I've ever taught ever since. But at any rate, his son, Kim, was one of my professors at Lewis and Clark when I was at Lewis and Clark College in Oregon. And so this book came out in 2003, The Muses Among Us. Mm-hmm. Little book is filled with the way Kim taught poetry, writing, etc. Now, Tom Romano and I, and Linda Reef now as well, we have all read this book. I couldn't even tell you how many times, but I was flipping through it and I stumbled upon one of my all-time favorite Kim Stafford assignments, The Random Autobiography, which he learned from Harry Truman, who had written for his wife a chronological record of their years together. Not very fancy things like 1943, a bad year. But when he gave his students the assignment of come up with this random collection of autobiographical moments, he got lines like, living on the high prairie in a little shack, view from the top of the windmill, still summer evenings. Okay, so it became this ongoing assignment. And he says, when an event, no matter how small, makes a strong impression on my emotions, it remains with me forever. How can I find for myself and invite my students to find a way to catalog the treasury of life experience for use in writing? And so he assigned it. And one of his students wrote, I once screamed at my boss in anger, and I have been falling down drunk on Irish mist. Simple, like you throw things together that don't sound like they'll go together. Any rate, in the end, Linda actually calls them rambling autobiographies, which I love as a change. But he tells his students that you collect all of these things, and happiness, sorrow, whatever, they become kind of like a history of who you are. So I started in my computer memory typing in autobiography, random autobiography, and compressed autobiography. I've called them lots of things, and all these student examples started popping up because I've been using it since I was teaching at Kennett in 2004 and 5. And I wrote a new one today. So my entire writing this morning, which was almost 2 hours, started with my worries about what we're going through, and then was about an hour where I was just listing all of these random moments. And one thing he mentions is that as you write one, oftentimes the next one is connected to the one before. And there's these threads of connection that keep that random list going. And in that, I'm not going to share any of them. It's a random collection. So my assignment for all of you out there today, if you're going to write with us, consider a random autobiography.
I love that.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So, Julia,
Yes.
talk to us. What books are on your mind today?
All right. So I'm going to have a random assortment here that are connected because they are all actually written by and about the lives of people of color. But I would also preface that by saying that I think it's so important for all of us to not compartmentalize our reading lives or our actual lives by buying into this idea that we are so different and so far apart. Because in these texts, you're actually going to see and hear about some commonalities. The first couple that I want to talk about, and this is tied indirectly to some work that I do with Disrupt Text. As Penny mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Disrupt Text, which is a Twitter hashtag. It's a movement. It's a school of thought. It is a school of practice. It is a group of people, and it is everybody. It's within all of us. The ability, the notion to change the literary canon as we know it into something that is evolving and something that really reflects the students that are in front of us. So one of the things that we have done on the Disrupt Text website is create a section, and it's just disrupttext.org, that has the 4 pillars of Disrupt Text. And the first one that I usually talk about is related to examining our own bias. So the books that I'm going to talk about today do tie in with the work, the ongoing work that all of us must do with examining our own biases that we have as we go about the world. We've heard of unconscious bias, but I mean more just like as we go throughout the day, the different subconscious and sometimes that float to the top conscious thought processes that we have that formulate the ways we view the world and other people and the books that we think are worthy of academic study, which leads us to pillar 2, which is decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing our thinking about what is worthy of academic study. And that includes, we have this sort of fascination with the written word, which we all love as lovers of the, reading and writing. We're language arts teachers. However, we need to think in different modalities, such as graphic novels that are worthy of academic study, podcasts or audiobooks that are worthy of bringing into the classroom for folks to study as a genre. So just sort of thinking in broader terms about what's worthy of academic study, because often the worship of the written word has been used historically to oppress non-white people. And I'm talking specifically about Native people being told that they needed to forget their own languages and learn English. And then mastery of English specifically, and maybe Shakespeare's English somewhat controversially, that indicated that you were civilized. That indicated that you had achieved the highest level of academic rigor. But that's not necessarily true in all societies, all cultures, which brings us to the third pillar of Disrupt Text, which is the one that I'm still really working on, which is looking at what we consider to be rigorous. Or, we say, okay, it is rigorous for you to understand Shakespeare. Well, the day that we can see Kendrick Lamar's lyrics, given the fact that he won a Pulitzer Prize for his music, the day that we can see those on the AP exam and recognize that rigor isn't just centered in the Eurocentric or Western canon, then we can start to free ourselves of some of these ideas that have actually historically in all countries that have been colonized been used to oppress people. And then the fourth pillar of Disrupt Text, which is what you two are doing, and I'm excited to be a part of it. You are collaborating with somebody who has different views and a different lived reality than yourselves. That is so important. We are amplifying and uplifting the stories and lived realities of people who we may have considered other in the past, and moving away from that and understanding that we are all connected. So how can we achieve more equity and balance there? So with that said, talked about Disrupt Text, I want to encourage you to check out the merch, but then also go visit the store and the website. And so you can start to have these conversations with people who are on your campus. My best friend works for T-Mobile, and her name is Renee. She lives in Seattle. She's shelter in place right now. She wears a Disrupt Text shirt when she goes to T-Mobile events because we have them in pink now. And people ask her, what is that? She does not teach language arts, but she is comfortable talking about how necessary it is to disrupt our understanding of what the canon is and of what we should be considering worthy of academic study and who we should be reading and talking about, because she's very well read because her best friend's a librarian. So she goes out there, she wears the Disrupt Text shirt, she starts the conversations. This is work that all of us can and should do, not just educators. So with that said, I want to talk a little bit about...
I have to stop you for just a minute here. Number
Yeah.
one, was it disrupttext.org or .com?
You can do either. They all kind of go to the same place because we have all the domains. So
I am so mad that I'm not wearing my Disrupt Text shirt. I could have been representing, it's upstairs.
You still can.
I still can. I can put it back on. But I had never considered buying it for people who aren't teachers. I love how you said that, because I have a bunch of people in my life who would do that, who would get it and would be willing to talk about it.
She does. I'm so proud of her. She does. Because,
Awesome.
T-Mobile colors are pink and white. So she bought the pink and white Disrupt Text shirt. And then it just kind of subtly leads people to be like, oh, that's cool. I want one. Let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm. I think we need one for the board members because of our Graces List commitment, the social justice libraries. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That whole idea of decolonizing the curriculum is so interesting, because both Penny and I have been in so many classrooms where it's the teacher picks the 6 books that the kids are going to study this year. The books are not representative of the kids who are sitting in that classroom. Mm-hmm. And it is, and then they wonder why the kids are disengaged. It reminds us, when Penny and I we did author study book clubs this year with Matt De La Pena's work, and a lot of them, I have a lot of Latino students, and just how many students, student after student, one student even said, this book was a godsend to me. The book was Mexican White Boy. And the kid said, I'm half Mexican, I'm half white. I've never read a book like this before. And the idea that YA books, or in your example, Kendrick Lamar, cannot be considered rigorous is really steeped in, I think, racism and bias.
It is. It is, and privilege. And, you have the privilege to say this isn't worthy of academic study, because often we teach what we were taught and we teach what we are comfortable with. And I will admit, I was an AP English teacher for a long time. And I'll admit that I had this idea that certain texts just automatically, just by virtue of being traditional, were worthy of academic study. And I was closed to a lot of really great literature because of that. So the day when I started to think about, okay, let's bring in Jason Reynolds' Long Way Down into AP Lit and look at these poems, that was a big deal for me and for my students, because it was accessible, but they also felt empowered. And we all want to be about the business of empowering education, right? Not just indoctrination.
Well, and it raises the issue too of rigor. I've seen House on Mango Street taught in 5th grade. I've seen it taught in 8th grade. I've seen it taught in 12th grade. And I've seen it taught in grad school, I think. And Penny speaks more eloquently about this than I do, but this idea that rigor is not defined simply by the text, but it's the thinking that's generated by the text and the kind of interaction that students can have with the text.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you're naming how dismissive it is. Like, the thing that I didn't really know until I was reading Stamped from the beginning was the idea of assimilation and how much our entire system is built so students will assimilate into white culture. And you don't see it when you're white as easily as I started reading it and interrogating, oh my word.
But also so that the teacher will be in that place of power, right? I mean, the teacher traditionally is the authority in the classroom and is also that person who holds the most knowledge. But what about exploring the text with your students alongside them and letting them teach you something? Yeah. Because maybe they know a little bit more about Kendrick Lamar than you do. Maybe they know a little bit more about what it is to live in the streets than you do. That's okay. That's good for us, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We've talked about that a lot, Penny and I, when we're conferring with kids when they're reading independently, that often it's better that we have not read the book that they've read, because we have to then value their approach to the book. We have to value their background and thinking. and that we don't go into teacher mode where we automatically ask the questions that satisfy what we're thinking about rather than what the kid is thinking about.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we get asked this a lot. How can you confer with a kid if you haven't read the book? We think it's better if we haven't read the book.
How can you be
And
in
we're like,
listening mode
that's
rather
exactly
than,
it.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It struck me so strongly when I conferred with one kid. I hadn't read his book, and the next one, she was reading Wuthering Heights. And I was like, oh, I know so much. I could just feel it. Like I wanted to command that conversation. And there's so much.
Well, we always talk about the sage on the stage, right? And it's one thing this is something that's a bigger conversation probably for another time. But as teachers, we say that we believe things, but how do your beliefs line up with your actions? Penny and I talked a little bit about this in Missouri. You know, how do our teacher beliefs, the things that we say we believe, the things that we will openly talk about with parents and with students, how do those line up with your actions? And if you're over here pushing a Western-centered canon, because that might be where you culturally feel the most comfortable and where you have the most schooling and knowledge, if you're doing that primarily or only, that prioritizes your comfort when you say that you have a student-centered classroom. And that's not what we want to do. So lightening the mood a little bit, I want to share a victory that was super exciting that happened. I have a language arts teacher who is on my campus, and she came to me and she said, she teaches ELA S, what we call ELA S, which is language arts in Spanish. And in Colorado, you can do that with newcomer students who just got here and do not speak English. So, which makes sense. They should continue to get language arts, but be eased into having to do language arts completely in English.
Mm-hmm.
So the curriculum says that her students are supposed to do Shakespeare. This was quarter 4 of their first year in the United States. She felt that was a little intense. I felt that was a little, colonial and just not really honoring where they might be coming from. The majority of our students are coming from El Salvador, some from Guatemala, some from Mexico. So, in a way that we could ease them into the American school system, and then also honor that they need to be learning language arts, she decided she wanted to teach the poet X in Spanish. And so I said, is there any way? I don't know that there are any digital copies. So what you typically do is you go onto the online digital resource and ask if you can get multiple copies, because you have to get licenses in order for somebody to be able to actually teach that. Because in many districts, the curriculum and the librarian departments are separate and they don't work together. Mm-hmm. And that's something that a lot of folks don't know, is that like my library books technically are not supposed to be used for curriculum. They're different budgets, different managers, all that stuff. Which sounds, I don't want to put any kind of, good or bad language on it, but it complicates things for us. So she came to me wanting to teach the poet X in Spanish. So I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Give me a little bit to work on it. We did not have the digital resources. So I went on to Twitter, and I want to thank all the people, because within 12 hours, we had over 30 copies sent to the school of the poet X in Spanish for her to be able, physical copies. Wow. Of course, that was before Snowmageddon and all of this. So they'll be there waiting for us when we go back. And I'm going to process them as library books, which is something that a lot of folks also don't know you can do. You can catalog them as a class set, and then you check them out as a class set to teachers. Nice. So that they can live a little bit longer, because they'll be paperback. So I'll reinforce the spines, process them, and then she'll check them out from the library as a class set. Then they'll go back in for the next person who wants to teach with them. So that was a victory. Wow. And very recently, these books came out in Spanish. So we're talking about The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. She was very excited when this one came out in Spanish to be able to share with her family members who speak Spanish. That is a triumph. And then also, The Education of Margot Sanchez just came out in Spanish as well by Lilian Rivera. Wonderful coming of age story as well. So these have been around in English, but let's think about that. These are written by bilingual American citizens who have grown up in a society where they go back and forth speaking English and Spanish. But their books became popular in English. The Poet X has a lot of Spanish in it. The Education of Margot Sanchez has some too. And when you don't speak Spanish, then you're forced to confront the fact that your monolingualism might be a limitation, which I think is really important for folks. So the fact that both of those books just recently came out in Spanish teaches us something too. Our most popular Latin American authors struggle to get into the Latin American market often because they are told that their books are written about America and American life, so they're not necessarily going to be relevant for people in the countries where their ancestors or relatives are still living, which I think is really interesting. And I'd love to do some work to change that in the future. I'm a very ambitious person. So I think the first step is making sure that our students have access to these books in English and Spanish. And if you have Spanish-speaking students, the audiobook is also phenomenal for the Poet X. I haven't listened to the one for the Education of Margot Sanchez, but Liz herself reads the Poet X audiobook, and I strongly recommend that one as well.
Wow. That is awesome.
It was exciting.
You know, there was a person on our Flipgrid, Alicia, who's a librarian, and I neglected to mention when I introduced you that you were an English teacher for 14 years. Is that right? And then became a librarian. Yes. And so you have a book club going at your school. You have all kinds of very cool, like this bridge between those two worlds. But I thought you'd be the perfect person to answer her question. And it was, how does the librarians support the English teachers? And even during this time, what kinds of ways could you support teachers and families?
As I mentioned, I'm a really ambitious person. So I've already started brainstorming, how can I get the bookmobile going once I'm not housebound? How can I physically go and pick up books? They can leave them on the porch, and then I can go to the library and grab books and do the checkout. Now, that's a little bit unrealistic when we are supposed to be staying in the house. So what I've done is I have my library webpage, which I just created on Google Sites. And I've got, which most librarians have, the library webpage. It has ways that students can access a digital collection. Right when we left, we were just doing our March Battle of the Books. So I strongly recommend, my Battle of the Books was digital, strongly recommend that if you started that and didn't get to finish, start it back up, because it's a great way for students to have discussions about the books that they're reading. So how can you move that from a physical, okay, we are voting on our favorite books, to a digital landscape? There are a couple of different ways. The first that I'd suggest is Goodreads has forums that you can build within your Goodreads account that are private, because I know that student privacy is an important issue. You can post a picture of the book that you want folks to talk about, or you can put two of them side by side and then have folks talk in the comments about which one of the ones they would like to vote for or justify. Another way you can do it is you can create a Google form. Once you've created the Google form, you can make a QR code that links directly to the Google form. Within the Google form, you can have a quick this book or that book, and they can just vote really quickly. Then it will generate the pie chart, of course, that we all love, which has the Google form results. And from that pie chart, you can update your grid and have that posted on your website. So Battle of the Books can still happen digitally. The purpose of the QR code is just to make it quick. You can also make a bit.ly, but the point is to link them to the Google form so that they can then vote really quickly, but then they can have the more extended conversation in the Goodreads group chat room. Some other things that I have thought of are we have an 18,000 title strong digital collection. And I know that there are a lot of conversations right now about how moving to digital learning does privilege some over others. What if you don't have money for that $100 a month utility bill that is the internet, high speed, Wi-Fi? What if you don't have a device? My school has one-to-one, so each student has their own device, but there are a lot of schools that don't. So students are trying to do homework on their phones because they don't have Chromebooks. I myself just went and bought a Chromebook for my daughter because she said that they're going to go to digital learning, and she didn't have one. She was using my computer. We were going back and forth because her MacBook broke, and that was that. So I guess that's my tangential way of saying, be aware that going to digital learning does privilege some over others, and it will still take a while before we can make that gap completely closed between who has access and who doesn't. So since we can't physically get to our libraries if we can't leave the house, you can do a sort of book trade or book exchange where folks are picking up and dropping off books. As long as we have mail delivery and as long as we have people who are able to leave a book here and pick it up, sort of like a little free library exchange, you can still do that as well. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think maybe even as a final thought from you, in what ways, what are the things that are you think are most important for a librarian to do to support the staff and support, I guess, more than anything, the reading lives of students? Because I feel like there've got to be a lot of librarians out there who work in places where the kids aren't represented in the curriculum. You know, how can they begin to nudge that work? What kind of things would you recommend?
Challenge our teachers to read some of the things that the students have chosen to read. Your librarian can go and pull up a list of the top 10 titles. So I want to challenge people to read some manga. That was my challenge to myself this year, was to read some manga and not just dismiss it as a fad that the kids like, but actually try to understand why they like it so much. And it's not just Naruto. The manga world is much bigger than Naruto. And I did not know that until I went in there and read some things myself. And then also, I have a couple of books here that I'll just quickly show that I know we're familiar with. You know that Jason Reynolds wrote Stamped, and I have a guide that I created for librarians that is available through School Library Connection that just has a couple of activities that librarians and language arts teachers can do together. And then, of course, here we've got Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. So this is a great way that folks can come together with students, with parents, and in communities, because you can read both of them in book clubs, separately, together. I encourage everyone to read both of them. My aunt is almost 90, and she said she wants to start with this one. So I'm going to send this one to her. But then I think this is going to whet her appetite to want to read this one. Mm-hmm. And so I'll say that I think that when you can get yourself in a position of humility where a student tells you this is something that I'm reading and you can take it seriously, rather than it always flowing the other way from us toward them, I think that that is a really important step in the right direction.
Sorry about that. Sorry. Not bad.
This is real life.
This is real life. I can't in here. It's okay.
That whole idea about, you know, I think it was years ago I heard Donna Lynn Miller say that if you shame a child's choice of reading, you shame the child. And that is such a powerful thing that has happened again and again and again in work that I've seen teachers do and librarians even do in some of the buildings I've worked in, where they dismiss like mystery and romance novels and so many things that kids are doing the really rigorous thinking about. And that's what frustrates me, is because for me, it was always about what kind of thinking are kids doing. And that I used to say, it's not rigorous. It's not even hard if you don't read the book and you go get it off SparkNotes. So calling a classic text hard or rigorous when the kid didn't read it, to me, is just ridiculous. But,
I agree.
And the other piece, though, of if you have to get outside of your experience and enter the world of Long Way Down, as a white person, you're doing work that's different. That's important work.
And I'll add that developing that, this is something that Penny and I have talked a bit about, is that it's a continuum of development and critical consciousness. It's not either you're woke or aware or you're not. There's a continuum. So if you can get to the place where you can say, okay, I'm experiencing reading Stamped very differently from how Penny and Kelly experience reading Stamped. Therefore, if you're going to run a book club in your community that's either going to be virtual or live, it's going to be a very different experience for folks based on their lived reality and based on what they know and don't know, which really quickly, do I have time to just quickly talk about this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Lifting as we climb The Black Women's Battle for the Ballot Box is a book that was written by a woman named Yvette Dion. She's a journalist by trade, and it's phenomenal. It's not very long, which is exciting because I think that it's something folks can use pieces from or read in its entirety. It's going to be a great bridge for social studies and language arts teachers, just like Stamped. The thing that this book does that's really interesting to me is it taught me as a Black woman living in the United States so much about history that was erased. So if we're looking to push ourselves, then we all need to think about what elements have been erased from our reality, from our literary lives. What has been erased? What have you not been exposed to just because of the way that you lived and were brought up? Even me. I was raised to prize the white canon. But when I read this, I see all of the things that I was not taught. All of the people's stories, all of the women who fought hard for Black women to have the right to vote that I did not even know about. I didn't know their names. I didn't know where they were from. I couldn't tell you who Fannie Lou Hamer was until fairly recently, I'm embarrassed to say. So it's important for us to just try to think about the gaps. We're always trying to evolve and not to try to get caught up in that perfectionism. It's not about you are or you aren't, you're the best or you're the worst. It's about the continuum and how can I keep pushing myself to grow.
Wow.
You pushed both of us to grow in the last half hour. I have a page of notes sitting in front of me, starting with the 4 pillars. And so, oh my gosh, I was so honored that you could come and share that thinking with us today. And don't forget that future Starbucks meetup that we're going to do.
I'm excited. I'm here for it. I'm excited. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great. I'm always excited to talk about work that I'm passionate about. And I'm very, very happy to share that passion with the two of you because you inspire so many people, including me.
Passion comes right through the screen. I just love it. Thank you so much.
It absolutely does. And we are going to link this to your Twitter so people can find you and find the work of DisruptX. And just, you've taught us a lot and helped us think about things today. And it's just an honor to have you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's been
great. And for our people, we're not going to see them this weekend. The people who've been following this thread.
Yep. So we'll just pick up again on Monday. We hope everybody has a safe weekend. And we look forward to continuing the conversation when we see everybody again next week.
Yep. We'll put a link up on Flipgrid. Respond with your thinking. And we just look forward to being together again. Thank you.
And in all future meetings, I will turn off my phone so my daughter doesn't try to FaceTime me in the middle of this talk. All right, everybody. Bye, Julia.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.